from America's finest city. This is Real Talk San Diego on ESPN 1700.
Hey, what's happening, gang? I'm your host, Jesse Ibanez, co-founder of the Greenhouse Group, and you are live in the Stash, baby. And we got some of the coolest local people talking about some of the coolest local stuff, and sprinkle a little consciousness on the conversation, leaving you a little better than how we found you. And in the studio today, I've got two local, can I call you local yokels? What is a yokel, by the way? Is that even really a thing?
I think yokel's accurate.
Yokel's accurate? Good. Okay, good.
Google it.
Specifically, that gentleman that you heard right there is Ed Mooney. He's flanked by the almighty, all-powerful Hughes Marino. And you guys are big, commercial real estate social juggernauts in San Diego. And so stoked to have you in the office today. Nice to meet you, Ed.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, my man. And flanked, of course, to your right, the man who needs no introduction, but here I am on the mic giving you one anyway, Ryan McCrary. And McCrary Law PC is actually your digs.
Yep.
And you went solo. You were on a roll. It was time to go solo.
Yes, it was.
Right? That was a couple years back, right? No, 2014.
Yep.
2014. Good. And, dude, so stoked to have you in the studio today. Thank you so much for coming aboard.
Jesse.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And I'll start with you, my man. So, that concept of law, it's got many different heads, right? So which one did you pull up out of the grass and decide to do the snake bite with? Like, what's McCrary Law Group looking to solve?
Yeah, so I'm a real estate transactional attorney. I'm a lover, not a fighter.
There
right?
you go. Yeah.
I'm not a litigator. I'm a transactional attorney. And my focus is on anything real estate, acquisitions and commercial leasing. My niche, if you would say, is definitely commercial leasing. I spent actually 5 years working with Ed at Hughes Marino in-house, and over the last 6 years, I've probably read and negotiated more leases than any attorney in the state of California.
Say more about that.
Yeah.
That's an incredulous statement.
Yeah. So, Ed, how many leases would you say that Hughes Marino goes through a year?
Yeah, we're doing over 300 a year, so...
300 a year. So I was there for 5 years, and I was intimately involved with the majority of the big ones. So I would say that I probably read anywhere between 100 and 150 leases and negotiated those leases a year during my time there. So extrapolate that, and
you got some sharp teeth.
Yeah. So I've
cutting them on 300.
I've been down that road a few times.
Contracts, yeah.
And particularly in San Diego. San Diego's a small town. You have some large institutional landlords, so you're dealing with the same lease document over and over and over again. So I'm now at the stage in my career where it's rare that I come across a lease that I haven't gone to bat for a client on in the past. So I've seen these lease documents before, and so I do things a little bit quicker, more efficient, and when you're paying me by the hour, that's usually a nice money saver for my client.
So if I could summarize, what I'm hearing you say is that you are the equivalent, analogous speaking, to maybe to a chess player, right? So you can see, because of your experience, a little further down the board than perhaps where it's being played.
Absolutely.
And based on that experience...
Yeah.
There's so much stuff that exists in between those two voids of the unknown that you actually went out and said, I'm going to start a whole law firm around that void. Yeah. And so, like, if a lay person like myself is just kind of hearing that and through the fold, like, what's some of the stuff that you find yourself like, saving your clients from? Like, what's some of the big, hairy, audacious stuff that exists inside that fold?
Yeah, so I guess we'll get to the basics. If I'm sitting down with these lease documents, these lease documents are going to be 60 pages. I've dealt with leases that are 100 pages deep, fine legal print. Yeah. And it's really a submission by attrition type approach that the landlords take, right?
Submission by attrition, okay.
Submission by attrition. Okay. They want to wear you out, and they don't want you to dig into the details. So that one, having the tenacity, the vigor to actually go to bat on all those details. I mean, that's one thing that I would say that sets me apart and my clients apart when we get into the lease negotiation process.
Now, can I go tit for tat real quick? Because I want to dying to hear the rest of that answer. Is in my practice, so we help folks get into and out of homes on the residential side of stuff, right? Yep. And what's curious about when you kind of get in there and you know, I know you're a lover, not a fighter, but when you kind of get in there and you get cute on some of those details, it turns off a lot of the other side, you know, either agent or seller respectively, or sometimes in combination, right? And if there's another person who's not squeaking that much, you know, they'll tend to go in the path of least resistance. So how do you really get the gloves on and get all nasty like that if it could cost you the deal?
Yeah, so on the residential side, you're usually not into the deal until you open escrow, right? And you have a signed offer.
Right.
And then that's when your broker steps in and you start doing your due diligence on the property, and your agent is stepping in and fighting that battle on the improvement side or the repair side. Right. On the leasing side, we don't get into an escrow. What typically happens is we'll sign a letter of intent. And that begins the process. Got it. So you get that letter of intent signed, and if you're dealing in good faith, you know, the landlord is dealing with you exclusively. Got it. And you can actually have that in your letter of intent that they'll deal with you exclusively.
And that makes a ton of sense because Ed, that's really where we introduce you now into the conversation. You exist inside of the entirety of the conversation, but for Hughes Marino, you that's the role that you play in the sense that I think you're senior vice president, right? Like you're the lease audit division, which means you usually get your hands on something when something doesn't quite go right.
That's correct, and that usually occurs during the lease term. But you know, going a step back, you know, as far as Hughes Marino goes, we represent the tenants finding their spots, negotiating the leases, and once the lease is negotiated, the letter of intent is signed, and that's when it goes to the attorney. Right. You know, be it Ryan. And we are a San Diego-based firm, offices throughout California. Now we started in San Diego, but we just opened up our first office in Northern California.
Oh, that's cool. What city?
We're in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. So we've spread out throughout California, helping clients. And actually, the reach goes beyond that as well. But you know, my background is on the landlord side of the table. So I joined Hughes Marino 5 years ago, and like you said, it's for the lease audit. What I saw when I was on the landlord side was that, you know, guys like Jason Hughes and Dave Marino were doing a great job negotiating leases. But once the lease was signed, once all the protections were negotiated and in the lease, landlords would put those leases in file cabinets and just basically treat every tenant the same, kind of a cookie cutter approach. And what I saw on the landlord side was, you know, if you ignore the lease, you're ignoring the protections, and tenants are getting in trouble along the way. So I joined Hughes Marino 5 years ago to kind of create the lease audit division and look for those pits and trap balls and protect our tenants. So it's been a huge success. We're saving clients millions of dollars each year, and you know, it just keeps rolling.
I love that he took it back around, because that is the exact reason why I got these two juggernauts. You can tell, you know, Hughes Marino, I mean, I don't sit around, you know, playing scoreboard, but come on, I mean, you guys are, if not the biggest in San Diego, right? I mean, you guys... In
San Diego, we're clearly, you know, we represent more tenants than any other firm.
Good. I wanted you to say it for both of us, right? Good. And then, you know, Ryan, you came from that background, and because you saw so many of these contracts being signed, saw where all the pitfall... So this is the genius right here, right? This is the panel, you might say, and we're going to get into this, and the theme of the day is going to be commercial leasing pitfalls. So you can see, the last hour we were talking about, you know, a more primary level, you know, actually finding what area works best for you, you know, getting in maybe an area that's a little more aggressive than another in terms of like price per square foot and getting into the contract. And then once the contract is incepted, that's when a whole dance ensues. And that's when you need to make sure you've got the best people in your corner. I say it often in my business that anybody with a shingle, I actually use the word hack. I was trying to be cool on the radio. Any hack with a shingle can get you into a contract. But it's and if it goes well, they look really good. But it's when it doesn't go well, and come on, gentlemen, let's be honest. It usually does not go well, right?
Absolutely.
There's always, that's why we all have jobs.
Right,
you know?
right.
There's always at least one thing that defines every one of these deals. And at that point in time, that's when you need the best in your corner, or you will fall by the wayside of attrition. So coming up, Ed, Ed Moon, by the way, they can catch you at hughesmarino.com, right?
Absolutely.
It's Marino, and of course, Ryan McCrary. We got you holding down the McCrary Law Group. Where do they catch you at, brother? You got a good web domain?
Not yet. That's actually under construction.
Phone number?
619-251-8424.
And that's why I would call you on anyway. You're old school with the phone.
Yep.
And, hey, stick around, gang, because like I said, coming right back up, we're going to get into these commercial leasing pitfalls. You're not going to want to miss this. You're in the stash, baby. Real Talk Radio San Diego. We'll be right back.
Hi, it's Courtney with 5 Star Escrow. If you provide 5-star service, your escrow company should too. When you need fast, friendly, and accurate service, think 5 Star Escrow. We're the escrow company of choice for the Friends of Real Talk San Diego, and we're committed to delivering a first-class experience when you need it most, at closing. Why settle for less? 5 Star Escrow, getting your transactions closed and getting you paid on time. Visit us at 5starescrow.com. That's 5starescrow.com.
Man, Steve, keeping it funky. What's happening, Steve? I see you in that box, baby. Making us bounce up here for a little 11 o'clock. ESPN Radio 1700. You're in the Secret Stash. I'm your host, Jesse Ibanez, Real Talk Radio San Diego. And in the house today, we're flanked by two of the guys that are probably right behind the guys, if you know what I mean. And they're the guys you got to have in your corner, or you don't really have a corner. It's like if you only got the manager, come on, rock, and you ain't got a cut guy. You've never been referred to as a cut man before, have you?
No, I have not.
That just happened right now. We're on ESPN. Yeah. We got to do a sports reference for ESPN, right?
I'm very aware of that.
That's right. That's my man, Ryan McCrary, and he's the owner of McCrary Law Group. No web, because he doesn't believe in it, gang. He doesn't like Al Gore, doesn't want to support the fact that he invented the web, and he's just on the phone. What's his number?
619-251-8424. My phone already blew up.
It did. 619-251.
8424.
I almost messed that up for you. And of course, Ed Moon. Ed, you're mad in the internet game. You probably made your first actual website in 1994, did you not?
We do have a website, and it's a pretty good one. HughesMarino.com.
Marino.com, Marino.com. Juggernauts in the commercial real estate game. And we're talking today about commercial leasing pitfalls. Let me get right into this. I'll start with you, Ryan. Let's start with the fundamentals. Let's get basics down. Can you come up with like a little handful of what you'd say would like be the least basics?
The least basics. Okay.
Not the least basics, the least basics.
Least basics. Yeah, so there are 5 sections of the lease that I say if you get those right, then you're 90% of the way there, right?
Perfect.
Okay, so we have the term, how long is the lease?
Makes sense.
The premises, what's the space that you're in, because square footage often dictates how much you're spending on space.
So what is that, like corroborating that what they're purporting is actual? Is that kind of what you mean? Like if you're saying it's 1,560 square feet, you're getting that?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Amount of suites. Go ahead.
The next one is operating expenses.
Okay.
And that's really where Ed's an expert in.
Okay, good. Yeah, we'll let Ed thread on that.
And then that would include the maintenance and repair obligations, and then the tenant improvement work letter.
TIs.
Okay, so that's the construction contract at the end of any
Which
lease.
Is big.
Yeah, there's a lot of costs involved with the work letter. If I can get those 5 areas right, then I'm 90% of the way there on my review. The most heavily negotiated provision on any lease is going to be the operating expenses and the maintenance and repair obligations between the landlord and the tenant. So those
That's interesting. I would have thought it would have been TIs. That seems like the one that I hear and see the most is like, is someone going to do what I need them to do, and how much is it going to cost me? How much is it going to cost them? Yeah. Not true, though.
No. So I know how long the lease is going to be. That's pretty easy to understand. I know how much rent I'm going to pay. That's pretty easy to understand. And then the work letter usually gets negotiated up front. But long term, in terms of what the landlord's going to pass through to you over the term of the lease, that's going to be found in your operating expenses and the maintenance and repair obligations under the lease. And those are your hidden costs, right? And on the submission by attrition side, if you're not negotiating those provisions, you can anticipate that you're going to be spending significantly more money than just rent on your space.
I'm going to put you on the spot right now only because I love a good story, and more importantly, whenever it's a concept that's not germane to me, I always find it better inside of a story. So if even it's anecdotal, like give me a quick example of how this would come up. So you're saying I've already signed the lease, I'm in the spot, and all of a sudden, boom.
Right.
Like a thud, this thing kind of is revealed.
Right. So it's dependent upon the lease structure. So we have a spectrum of lease structures, triple net leases to gross net leases. Right.
Agreed.
The triple net leases, your base rent's going to be really low, and then you're taking on all the burdens of the owner in that property, right? You're paying for taxes, insurance, utilities, CAM charges. On the gross side, you're paying rent. On a true gross lease, you're just paying rent, and those are very rare in commercial leasing. Okay. So most leases are going to be in San Diego are going to be set up on a base year lease, okay? And everything's going to be baked into your rent. If it's not triple net, it's going to be baked into your rent in that first year, and then you're responsible for increases in cost above those costs during the base year. And those are your operating expense increases. Okay, so year 2, you're out of your base year. All of a sudden, the operating expenses on the building just went up 20%. Bam, they send you a bill. Not only are you getting a rent statement, but you're also getting an operating expense statement that says, hey, in addition to your rent, you owe me an additional $500.
And can you imagine how challenging that is, not only to have to understand that, because come on, let's hand up, right? A lot of people don't really know what they don't really know. And I'm saying that with love, meaning I'm even included in that game. Like, you get all caught up on what my dad used to say. You go running down the dime, and son, you're going to let the dollar go flying by. You know, you're all hooked up on location. You're all hooked up on what the rent's going to be. And you don't see that the snake, as we said earlier, is actually in the grass.
That's right.
And then, boom, it lands.
Yep, devil's in the details.
So either you just pay it, and you're like, all right, cool, or...
Yeah, well, if it says in your lease that they can charge you for that cost, then you're going to pay it.
Right,
or you're going to default on your lease.
Right, regardless,
right?
Sure.
So the key when you get me involved is to make sure that we're negotiating that provision to protect you from excessive charges. You don't, I mean...
That it's fair.
Exactly. Everything should be fair. And as long as you can articulate what's a legitimate concern of the landlord with a legitimate concern of the tenant, and you can come to a fair conclusion, it's going to be a fair deal, and you're not going to get these big, huge bills because the landlord decides they want to put a fitness center in the building and then charge the tenants because they just improved their asset.
And we're getting the cart in front of the horse right now because we're going to hit on that later. But Ed, this is perfect opportunity for you to merge in right now with your expertise. So we're talking about operating expenses and these types of things.
Right.
So you heard about the big 5, right? So that's your like bread and butter right now.
Correct.
So give me an anecdotal story about how you merge in on that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So when a tenant signs his lease, like Ryan said, you pretty much know what your rent's going to be. Let's say it's $2 a foot, and you know I'm going to pay $2 a foot for my term. It's the operating expenses that really catch you off guard.
Right.
And if you take the time to understand it, you'll assume there'll be inflationary increases in your expenses. So you say, okay, I'm going to have a couple more cents per square foot every year. And I'd say half the time that's correct. But there's a lot of instances where landlords just don't manage the building well. So where you think you're going to get a 2-cent increase, you get a 10-cent increase on the expenses, and that could be a big number. I'm working with one client that came to me yesterday. They're paying about $25,000 a month in rent. Landlord decided to do a $100,000 repair, and their share of that's going to be $50,000. So the equivalent of 2 months' rent being thrown at them, where they're just anticipating, minimal increases. So
now, does the tenant have any rights in this? Is it a democratic thing at all? Like, if the oars are going to be shipped onto their boat with the burden of the expense, do they get to does it depend from landlord to landlord, or is it kind of a universal thing?
Well, it really depends on the lease. That's why, the leases are written by the landlords for the landlord. So if you're a tenant and you sign their boilerplate lease, you probably don't have the protection. Mm-hmm. If you've got a good broker looking at that, if you've got an attorney who's on the front end protecting you, it's pretty easy to get some protection. But most businesses just, they focus on the rent, they focus on the term, they focus on the TIs, and they forget about the expenses. Yeah. And that's where you really get hurt, along the way.
If you want to put it in a residential context, it's like, okay, on a multi-tenant building, you have an HOA, right? Because you have all these common areas, and usually there's a board involved in making decisions on all those expenses.
That's actually where my thought came from.
On the commercial side, multi-tenant building, there is no HOA. The HOA is the landlord, and the landlord's making all the decisions for managing their asset.
Well, and it makes sense, too, because in the HOA, in that example, everybody owns.
Right.
It's like fractional ownership, so to speak, to use something out of place. But back to the concept, though, about these expenses. So I guess the concern that I have is that, in residential, going back again, you basically, I'm just going to make an assumption and say a lot of people know that it's scary to call the agent on the sign. Okay? it's kind of like people know enough about residential to where that kind of, that corner, that truth is out, so to speak, right? I can't think of something more clever to say. And so, like, if you do that, they're making twice the money, and the buyer's really not getting represented.
Absolutely.
They're just sort of the pawn that kind of flies into the mousetrap, right? So in commercial, though, would you kind of agree that a lot of people call the person on the sign?
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses are making that mistake. They don't know who to call. I mean, in residential, you call Berkshire, you call your company. There's
the Greenhouse Group.
The
Ed.
Greenhouse Group.
Greenhouse Group.
You call the Greenhouse
Thanks
Group.
for doing your homework before the show.
But on commercial, you usually call the sign, and that broker on that sign is representing the landlord. So,
right.
Unfortunately, they'll be happy to represent you and do a dual agency and. Probably have a lack of disclosures.
And slide the boilerplate landlord lease across to you, right?
Right.
And so you can imagine there's a lot of situations where you guys end up getting the ball passed over to you because you're downstream. Most of the time, would you say not all the time, you're getting it after it's already been done?
Well, at Hughes Marino, we're usually not. I mean,
actually, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So at Hughes Marino,
you're part and parcel to the whole process.
Right.
Ed.
Right.
Yes.
So we're trying to get there up front. We're advertising. We're getting our name out, and we're obviously it's working.
Right.
We do get calls from tenants that are kind of at the 12th, 11th hour, saying, "I'm about to sign an amendment. Can you help me?" And usually it's a little late at that point, but we try to see what we can do. But the tenant really needs to get tenant representation at the beginning.
Yeah.
And
it's just a matter of knowing half the time, right? Because we were talking at the top of the show about how, if that's the landlord's wishes, and you're in a market like San Diego where there's a ton of demand, then if you squawk up and you start causing all these problems or whatever, they might just pass on to the next person. But that's okay. Because it's better than locking yourself into the cement shoes of a 5-year lease with all these things built into it, and they're going to want personal guarantees for most of the part, right?
Right.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I remember that was the case with us. When we were looking, a lot of them did because we were looking in a popular spot.
Yep.
And so that's kind of tricky, right? So when you get involved,
Right.
Ed, sometimes it's like, Argh.
Well, I mean, a good broker knows the market, knows what the landlord's going to do. I mean, if you do enough transactions, you know how far to push. So I don't think a good broker will not allow you to lose the deal over the negotiation. Again, they know how far to push. It's a landlord market right now, but the landlords still want to get the deals done. So I wouldn't hesitate to get in there and let your tenant rep be aggressive and get you the best deal possible.
I can tell you that the letters of intent that I see from a tenant that calls on a sign versus a tenant that has an agent representing them are going to be much more detailed. And they're actually, in the letter of intent stage, going to start negotiating terms on operating expenses, maintenance and repairs, and all those items. If I get a letter of intent from a landlord broker, those letters of intent just somehow skip that entire negotiation process, and they just go straight to lease with, we got rent, we got term, and that's it. Right. So then, and on those stages, that's when I'm left coming in, and I'm negotiating these essential terms that a tenant that has a tenant rep broker is going to already have done.
Yeah, it seems so clear from this side of the table, but unfortunately, and even in the residential game, I don't have the stats, but there's still a contingent of people that just go and call the sign.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is what it is. You get what you get. But I'd love it if, at least if you were tuning in right now and we had you from your 11 to noon hour, who knows, you're getting ready to shut it down to the cubicle, go grab some lunch or what have you, and you're in a spot where you're thinking, hey man, maybe I'm either looking to get into my first commercial spot, my business is growing, economy's doing okay in San Diego, we're starting to flex a little bit, doing our thing, or maybe you're growing a little bit right now, and your growth means you need a new space. Now's the time to make sure you get the right team. And I would say from this panel right here, Hughes Marino, I mean, come on.
Absolutely.
You guys, I could call you earlier the juggernauts of San Diego. Not only because you get the right representation on the forefront, but you also got guys like Ed who are hanging out right behind them. So it's not just a bunch of bandits running across the battlefield. It's an entire army of archers, and then the infantry men. I'm going to get out of my pay grade right now. I don't even know what happens after that.
No, I mean, you're nailing it. You've got it. I mean, that's really what is different. I mean, a lot of brokers are transaction oriented. I'll see you every 5 years type thing. At Hughes Marino, we're committed to be there all along the way, and I'm a big component of that. We have our construction management. We have a whole team to support the tenant if anything comes up along the way.
That's my man, Ed Moon, and you can catch him, by the way, and his whole team at HughesMarino.com. And Ryan McCrary, come on, man, you hope that you don't get to that stage, but unfortunately it happens quite a bit. I would say fortunately for you, my friend, because you're right there to help folks out with McCrary Law PC, and only a phone number.
619-251-8424.
We're going to be working on the website next. And coming up, gang, we'll get you all caught up on some sports updates. And when you come back, we're going to be talking more about what 2 commercial leasing pitfalls you got to make sure you know before you go. We'll be right back. You're in the Stash, Real Talk Radio San Diego.
Hi, it's Courtney with 5 Star Escrow. If you provide 5-star service, your escrow company should too. When you need fast, friendly, and accurate service, think 5 Star Escrow. We're the escrow company of choice for the Friends of Real Talk San Diego, and we're committed to delivering a first-class experience when you need it most, at closing. Why settle for less? 5 Star Escrow, getting your transactions closed and getting you paid on time. Visit us at 5starescrow.com. That's 5starescrow.com.
That's like a little funky breakbeat you got going in there, Steve. Steve funking it up. Boom. But could you get like a little beatbox going, a little triad? Ed, something tells me you got a mean beatbox.
I don't have it. I don't have it, no.
All right. That's not like a Hughes Marino meeting. You guys all start out with like a beatbox.
We've got a few guys that are very talented.
One person starts off like, and then someone comes in like with the hi-hat.
We've got a lot of music, but not a beatbox, yeah.
That's right, my man. Ed Muna, by the way, Senior Vice President, and heads down the lease audit division at the fellows over there at Hughes Marino. Catch them at HughesMarino.com. The juggernauts of the commercial leasing, and you guys do tenant representation only.
Correct.
You don't do the whole dual.
We don't,
thing.
and actually, I mean, we talked about that in the last segment. But one of the things I didn't mention is there is a new law that came out July 1st, where a broker actually has to disclose to the tenant before they get started whether there's a conflict of interest, basically, if there's a dual agency. And that's a Senate Bill 1171, which Jason Hughes actually helped write over the last couple of years. So that's...
I'm sorry. So leading up to this point, the tenant was in the dark? That
they were
being dual agent?
If you called on one of those landlord broker signs on the building, they did not. Okay, so on the residential side, you have the agency disclosure form. Of
course.
Right? That was specific to real estate transactions. It didn't apply to commercial transactions.
Wow.
And as of January 1, it applies to commercial transactions. So at least you give the tenant a fighting chance to know at the opening gate.
And you're saying Jason actually...
Jason spent a lot of time in Sacramento making that happen.
Yep. Nice work, Jason.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Hughes Marino on the map, doing good stuff. Yep. So Ed, right before the break, we were talking about this concept of the pitfalls. And I love that frame, too, because I think that is a perfect volleyball lob for where you guys come in. You're the chess players. You're the masters that can see a couple plays further down the board than where the game is actually being transacted. And so having the, experiential capital of 300 leases you've seen over the last couple years. And Ed, how long have you been doing this?
25 years.
25 years. That's what I'm saying. Stalwart of the game. You know what I mean? And you don't get to where you are unless you've seen... I don't even know twice, thrice as many of those in the last 25 years, right? And then you start to get a mastery, and you start to see the common pitfalls that people make, and unfortunately, you see them being made where you see them a little usually too matured, and if you catch them or head them up front, and that's what I want to try to inspire you guys right now. If you're tuning into the Secret Stash on Real Talk Radio, is what to do about them, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the ones that's atop my list, and I want to throw you guys back on the hot seat, is landlord tricks. Can you guys think of a couple landlord tricks that you guys see kind of played often? Yeah, Ed, I'll start with you.
Sure.
What's one of the ones you see happening all the time?
Well, I mean, if you're a landlord and you have a building that's empty or has a high vacancy, you're going to tighten your belt on the expenses. If you have to do a $50,000 repair, you're going to hold off until the building is leased, because at that point, the tenant can basically be paying for a good chunk of it. Mm-hmm. So you see that happen a lot where, they hold off, you get your base year established, or you enter into a triple net lease, and next thing you know, the landlord's doing a bunch of renovations, redoing the landscaping, knowing that they can pass that through. So, again, it's getting the protections in the front where you get some consistently applied language to prevent those, and it's not always easy to do. You got to trust the landlord. You got to know the landlord. So that's another important factor going in is, who am I entering into this contract with, and can I trust them? Are they reputable?
And it's tricky too in commercial because, like, you know, in residential, like we might have a flip. Right, you know what a flip is, right? You know, investor goes in there, flips it up, you get, you know, they rehab the house, and it's like what you're kind of negotiating for the most part is the price. That's like our big variable. Okay, how much am I willing to pay the guy who did it for me so I can go in and just move my stuff in and not have to worry about fixing anything, right? But with commercial, it's a little different because, like, if you go in and you get kind of a rundown building, you might be afraid of the triple net.
Right.
Right, because you might have some expenses that are thrown on you later on the road, but you don't really get the option, do you? Like, they kind of say, is it offered or is it not? Or if it's not, it's full gross, right?
Yep.
But that's not something that you get to really go into as the tenant and be like, strong-arm them on what kind of lease they'll be willing to accept. Correct or incorrect?
Well,
No.
yeah, I don't know if that's correct. Yeah.
No, you have the ability to negotiate what they can pass through in terms of capital improvement cost. Okay, and within the operating expense provision, the most negotiated provision within the operating expense provision is the capital improvement language, which says, okay, can the landlord make improvements to their asset and then pass through the cost of those improvements to the tenant? And what are the limitations to that? So when you lease a space, all you want is the building to maintain the building in the condition that it was when you leased it, right? I didn't lease my space in this building because it had a daycare center, it had a fitness center. I leased it because it was the building that was there as is,
Or it was going to be some grand future value,
right? And I want them,
which is a landlord concern.
Right. And I want them to maintain that asset as is. I don't want the landlord to increase their occupancy in their building and start making these grand improvements, reskinning the building, redoing the lobbies, adding a fitness center.
Reskinning meaning redoing the exterior.
Exterior,
right? Lobbies, the general areas, right?
And then being able to pass those improvements to their asset, which adds value to their portfolio.
Sure it does.
Right? Passing those costs through to all the tenants.
It's super gangster.
Yeah.
Right? Did Capone write that stuff back in the Prohibition era? I mean, that come on. I mean, there is no corollary to that in real estate because, again, all we negotiate on is the price.
Yep.
All that gets cooked into the price. And there's so many, again, the analogy, snakes in the grass of commercial. Yeah. Right? So many of these little moving parts. So I love that because you were talking about the capital improvements. Anything else to riff on about that when you see landlord tricks?
Well, it probably goes into property taxes as well, right? Okay. A landlord's owned a building for a long time, and it's sitting vacant, and they want to sell that property to an investor, and now we have an incentive to get a tenant in there to occupy that space, and right now they're real estate taxes, real estate taxes are a significant portion of those triple net costs.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely. Taxes are huge.
So they've owned the building for 20 years. They have a low basis in that property. They get the tenant in there to occupy the space. The tenant's responsible for increases in real estate taxes. Okay, so what happens when the landlord sells the building to that investor to the real estate taxes? Right? And Prop 13 says that your building's going to get reassessed at sale. Just like in the residential side. Right. So all of a sudden the assessed value quadruples because they had a low basis to begin with, quadruples, and those increases are all passed through to the tenant.
Gangster.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of that is also leftovers from Prop 8 reductions. Just like you can get a reduction on your house, you can get it on commercial property. So when the market really tanked, most of the smart landlords were getting Prop 8 reductions. And what happens is the county just kind of lets it continue. You know, it's gradually going up, but a sale will definitely trigger a new assessment. So one of the things we do, representing the tenant, is taking a look at the property taxes, seeing what the exposure is. And if the exposure is significant, if nothing else, it's a real difficult thing to negotiate the Prop 13 protection. Landlords push back hard on that. But at least the tenant understands what the exposure is. If the landlord sells, your rent's going to go up 20 cents, couple $1,000, whatever the number is. And, it's just avoiding the surprises. If you can avoid the pass-through completely, great. If you can, at least know what you're getting into when you get into that building.
And
that's mastery.
Yeah, and on those Prop 13 protections that you can get in the lease, in reality, they, in most cases, and particularly on a multi-tenant, they affect the value of the landlord's assets significantly more than that impact is to the tenant. So they can be tough to get, but there is middle ground that you can negotiate there, and it's just important to recognize the risk before you sign the lease.
And again, I was just trying to give you guys the props and the recognition to say that is mastery, right? That's what you're paying for. And I know I use the analogy earlier about anybody with a shingle can get you into a deal, but having a team, a cadre, if you will, to be able to consider all these things, because you still might get the place that you want. But if you at least know that going in, rather than having that thing be surprised upon you 2 or 3 years into your 5-year term when they go to sell the bill, et cetera, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So 2 landlord tricks I heard you guys say. Alpha was capital improvements, and beta was property taxes.
Right. And, you mentioned the fitness center, the conference centers. Those are good things. I mean, tenants choose to go into buildings because they have the fitness center, the conference room, the restaurant. What we're seeing, though, is the market's getting so competitive with landlords that they're actually adding those after the fact. If a building's vacant, they get it occupied, pass it through. I mean, we're now seeing landlords operating restaurants themselves and guaranteeing profits. So if the restaurant's not doing well, they're going to expense the operation of the restaurant to the tenants. And if you've been in that building for a while, that you're not protected from that. So again, those are things we look at is, what's this landlord thinking? What, they got grand plans for this building, but what does that mean to your bottom line, while you're in that building for the next 5 years?
Mm-hmm. That's getting me fired up, man. I don't know if it's just the local juice coffee that I'm. By the way, is this not the best stuff
amazing.
in the world?
That's great stuff.
I'll give my props out. My man Justin Gittleman, he owns Local Juice Company. You could probably catch him on Facebook. He's at the Local Juice Co. on Facebook, and you can go there and you can see what little boutique coffee shops he's in where he sells this stuff. He's all over all farmers markets. Is this not the best cup of coffee you've ever had?
Good stuff.
Well done, Justin.
And he's got it in the little apothecary. It's all cold pressed. My man Justin Gittleman, thank you for always fueling these segments in the stash. Coming up, gang, I feel like at this point in time, the stage is set. We have sort of fished out what you guys do, why it's so important to have you as, fundamental elements of the team going into the battle, like we talked about earlier, Ed. And then also, using this intellectual capital to kind of look a little further upstream and be able to see, hey, what are some potential pitfalls that I could possibly try to avert by knowing in advance? Even if I know and I still do it, at least I know so I'm not surprised. So the final leg of this journey with my man, Ryan McCrary. And by the way, I got your phone number now, Ryan. McCrary Law PC, 619-251-8424. I'll give that to you one more time in case you're in your car. It's 619-251-8424. And you help folks once stuff kind of has already happened and you need some love. Yeah. You need somebody to sprinkle some consciousness on it. That's where my man comes in. And Ed Muna, you're part of a big team that's happened a little bit further upstream with HughesMarino.com. You can catch them, by the way, the largest leasing firm by far, my man Ed said, in San Diego County. We got the 2 most intellectually capable people in this conversation in the room today, hoping to make you guys a little bit smarter about this topic. Real Talk Radio San Diego. We'll be right back.
Hi, it's Courtney with 5 Star Escrow. If you provide 5-star service, your escrow company should too. When you need fast, friendly, and accurate service, think 5 Star Escrow. We're the escrow company of choice for the Friends of Real Talk San Diego, and we're committed to delivering a first-class experience when you need it most, at closing. Why settle for less? 5 Star Escrow, getting your transactions closed and getting you paid on time. Visit us at 5starescrow.com. That's 5starescrow.com.
Perfect way to send this conversation off, my man Steve. Thank you for bringing it live. You are live, by the way. This is The Secret Stash. I'm your host, Jesse Abanyas, co-founder of the Greenhouse Group. We're helping folks get into and out of homes over on the residential side and move with those people with purpose. On this conversation panel today, we've got the commercial wing of things with 2 people that I respect the most inside this conversation. And of course, from Hughes Marino, come on, man. Big guys in town. Ed Muna, you are the senior vice president over there, and your unique contribution is in the lease audit division.
Correct.
Catch you guys over there at HughesMarino.com. And Ryan McCrary, owner of McCrary Law PC, and you can catch him. He usually floats a little further down the stream from the actual inception of the lease, which Hughes Marino would love to help you guys with. And if there's something that is maybe a miss or something you need some help or some love or some support on, that's where Ryan plays a big role over at McCrary Law PC. You can catch him at 619-251-8424. 8424. Gentlemen, final thoughts on this, right? So the crescendo, of course, was we sort of built this conversation up. You guys are the guys right behind the guys. The muscle, you might say, the bouncers in the conversation when stuff doesn't quite go as planned. Then we talked about heading stuff off a little further upstream, some snakes in the grass. What are some tenant or landlord tricks that you get played that you guys see often? How would you put a footnote to this conversation? And Ed, I'll start with you. Final thoughts.
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to the operating expense, I'd say if you're a business owner, pay attention to what the landlord is sending you. It's amazing how many statements I review where I find a mistake that's been recurring for years. And at that point, it's really difficult to go back and say, you've been overcharging the tenant $50,000 a year. We can usually get some recovery, but you've probably lost some money. And then with the leasing, this is a landlord's market. So we're seeing a lot of tenants come to us a little late, 30 days, 90 days in advance of their expiration or when they want to start looking for space.
Ooh, that's a good point.
Yeah, so I would say, a year in advance. You need to build a leverage. You need to look at what your options are.
A year in advance.
I would say a year in advance, you need to start thinking about that lease. So.
A year in advance of your current lease expiring your potential to want to get into a new one.
Right, exactly. And you don't know whether that's going to be. You may say, you know what, I know I'm going to renew, so I could wait until 30 days, 60 days before, but you really lose a lot of leverage. And again, we get calls from tenants that have the amendment in front of them, and there's very little we could do at that point, or even 30 days beforehand. There's not much you can do to convince a landlord you're going to be hitting the market at that point. So you'll save a lot of money in the long run if you just focus more on planning in advance and taking a look at those operating expense charges that they send you every year.
And when you use a firm like yours, you not only have that expert counsel up front to be able to head off any things before they come to happen, but then they can also pass that question down to you where you can take a look at that stuff that they're sending you every year or whatever to make sure it's still in alignment with what is fair.
Right, exactly.
And what it is that you agreed to. So you're not paying more.
Yeah, that's exactly right. A well-negotiated lease, you got a lot of money to save. So, it's the other thing that's real interesting is when you have that protection and landlord's not honoring it, and you never realize that. We have tenants that go through a whole term being overcharged because the landlord didn't recognize that you had a capital exclusion or some type of protection.
And you get that protection by going to a good firm first, who knows what they're doing, who has those multi-levels of support behind him. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is HughesMarino.com.
All right.
Need like a little after that or something, right? You can catch them at HughesMarino.com for all things, because you don't represent the landlords, right?
We don't represent the landlord. So we'll represent businesses in their leasing and purchasing. So whether it's a renewal, a relocation, a renegotiation, and purchasing your building.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, Ed.
Thank you.
I appreciate you, brother.
Thank you.
Ryan, what say you, my man? So from the legal side of stuff, does that what Ed said resonate with you as final thoughts? It's a landlord's market, all that stuff?
Yeah, and it's definitely a landlord's market right now. But it doesn't mean that you need to fall into that submission by attrition pitfall, right? There's an element of fairness in any contract, and that first round of leases that your landlord's going to draft is going to be very one-sided. And you can imagine if you had $1 million asset and you're going to let somebody else use it, you can imagine what that contract is going to look like. But you don't know what you don't know. And there are some very simple protections that it's just an element of fairness that's being put back into this document that's very one-sided that can save you a lot of money down the road. In fairness, even in the landlord's market, a landlord is going to be fair up front. And the best time to negotiate a contract is before you sign it.
Ding, ding. Yeah, I love that thought. And so, I think the theme that I wanted to get you guys in here in council on the roundtable was to talk about some of the pitfalls and stuff. And so, if you could distill it down into one sentence, what would you say? What advice would you give to some knucklehead like me, who's getting ready to get into their first commercial soiree?
The devil is in the details. Have somebody that knows what they're doing review your lease.
Imagine that. Ryan, you did. And that's why you started Ryan McCrary. It's actually McCrary Law PC. And you can catch Ryan, by the way, at 619-251-8424. Doing good work over at 619-251-8424. 8424. Ed, if you had to put it down into one sentence, what would you say to some knucklehead looking to get in their first lease?
I'd say make sure you have an exclusive rep and don't call the landlord's broker.
Don't call the landlord on the sign. Heard it from my man,
Absolutely.
Ed. That's right. I love that thought. So, gentlemen, thank you guys so much for coming and hanging out and improving the consciousness of this conversation. I feel confident that you left me a little better than how you found me. And I thank you also for dumbing it down to my level, right? Because the truth is, that's where the most inspiration happens, right? You guys have the capacity and the bandwidth to talk about things that you could only learn after 25 years in the game. But helping us back down here on the street get a little bit closer to what it is that we want from where we started. I appreciate your contribution to this conversation. And that's what you guys can get every Tuesday from 10 a.m. to noon over in the Secret Stash. And we got some cool local people talking about some cool local stuff next week as well. That's what Real Talk Radio San Diego is all about. I appreciate you hanging out. We'll be back next week.